The crack was maybe 2 inches long, hairline thin. If the light had been hitting the steel from any other angle, I would have missed it completely. I almost did. It was a Tuesday in late October, the kind of cold that doesn't feel cold until you stop moving. I'd been on my back under the loading dock frame for about 40 minutes, replacing a hydraulic coupling that had been leaking slow for 2 weeks. The foreman kept saying it wasn't urgent. I kept saying it was. That's basically the whole story of my career in 3 sentences. My name is Koller. I'm 41 years old. I work industrial maintenance, bridges, loading infrastructure, heavy steel structures, whatever's broken and whoever's paying. I've been doing it since I was 22, right out of a 2-year program at community college in Akron, Ohio, because that's what made sense when my daughter Bree was born and her mother left 8 months later. You don't go chasing a 4-year degree when you've got a baby in a 1-bedroom apartment and exactly one person who depends on you not to fall apart. I didn't fall apart. I got certified. I got good. I got quiet about both. Bree was 17 that October. She wanted to study environmental science at Ohio State. The application fee alone was $60. I know because I had checked my bank account 3 times before I clicked submit, doing the math on whether I could cover it and still make rent. I could, barely. That's the context. That's who I was standing in front of the Hargrove distribution terminal on a Tuesday morning when I found the crack. The Hargrove family owned things. That was the simplest way to put it. They owned the terminal where I was working, which was one of 4 they operated in Ohio. They owned a logistics company that ran the terminals. They owned 3 commercial properties in Columbus, and what I later found out was a 40% stake in a regional freight rail line. Patricia Hargrove, the grandmother, the one who'd built most of it, had died 2 years earlier and left the operation to her daughter, Renata Hargrove. I'd never met her before that day. I'd barely heard of her. I was still on my back under the dock frame when I shifted my flashlight to check the secondary load bracket and caught the reflection. Something wasn't right about the surface. I moved the light again. There it was, a lateral fracture running along the upper weld seam of the dock's main support column, right where the horizontal beam meets the vertical post. The crack ran maybe 2.5 inches across the face of the steel. Tight, nearly invisible, but it was there, and I knew what it meant. This dock had 60,000 pounds of capacity. There were trucks backed up to it 6 days a week. If that weld failed under load, the entire right side of the frame would drop. Anyone standing on the platform, a driver, a loader, the dock supervisor who liked to lean against that exact post while he drank his coffee, would go down with it. I slid out from under the frame. I stood up. I took 3 photographs with my phone. Then I went to find the site manager. His name was Derek Pullham. He'd been managing the terminal for 11 years, and he had the energy of a man who had survived 11 years at a job he didn't particularly like by avoiding anything that would generate paperwork. I showed him the photos. He looked at them for about 4 seconds. "That's surface rust," he said. "It's not," I said. "Surface rust doesn't have a shadow. That's a fracture." "The metal's separating." He handed me my phone. "I'll have someone look at it. It needs to come out of service today," I said. "If a loaded truck backs up to that dock and the driver walks the platform." "Grant," he said my name the way people say it when they want you to understand that the conversation is over. "I'll have someone look at it." I stood there for a moment. I was thinking about the math again. Not bank account math this time. Load distribution math. The kind of stress that Weld was already under just from thermal cycling over the past 2 winters. A fractured size, in that location, with active loading. I'd seen what happened. Not at this terminal. Somewhere else, years ago. A dock collapse in Youngstown. Nobody died. 2 men were injured badly enough that they never worked again. "I need you to note that I reported this," I said. Derek looked at me. "Fine." I went back to the hydraulic coupling. I finished the job. I drove home. Bree was at the kitchen table when I got in, laptop open, pencil behind her ear. She was drafting her personal statement for Ohio State. She'd been working on it for 3 weeks. Every couple of days she'd read me a paragraph and ask what I thought, and I would say something like, "That part where you talk about the creek survey. Lead with that," and she'd nod and type something. "How was it?" she asked without looking up. "Found something," I said. I opened the refrigerator. We had leftover chili, half a block of cheddar, and 4 eggs. A fracture in a load-bearing column. Bad? Yeah? They listening? I looked at the chili. Not yet. She looked up then. She had her mother's eyes, but she'd gotten my stubbornness, which I'd always considered either lucky or cruel, depending on the week. You're going to push it, aren't you? It wasn't really a question. I'm going to push it, I said. She went back to her personal statement. I heated up the chili. The next morning I put my findings in writing. Not an email. I typed a formal deficiency report, the kind I'd learned to write from an old supervisor named Al Krebs who told me when I was 25. If it's not on paper, it didn't happen, and if it didn't happen, it's your fault when it does. I documented the location, the dimensions of the fracture, the load classification of the dock, my assessment of risk, and my recommendation: immediate removal from service pending structural inspection by a licensed engineer. I sent it to Derek. I CC'd the regional safety officer whose name I found in the company's posted compliance documents. I kept a copy. Then I drove back to the terminal and finished a separate work order on a conveyor motor. At 2 in the afternoon, Derek called me into the site office. There was someone else in the room, a woman standing near the window with her arms crossed and her phone in her hand, looking at me the way people look at something they've been told might be a problem. She was maybe 50. Well-dressed in the way that isn't showy. The coat looked expensive but not loud, and she wore it like she'd forgotten she had it on. Her hair was dark with some gray at the temples, and she hadn't tried to cover it. "This is Miss Hargrove," Derek said. I looked at him, then at her. "You're Renata Hargrove," I said. "I am," she said. "And you're the maintenance tech who shut down my dock." "I flagged a structural deficiency in your dock," I said. "I recommended removal from service. The dock is still in service, so I didn't shut down anything." She tilted her head slightly. "Derek tells me you think there's a crack in the support column." "There is a crack in the support column." She looked at the phone in her hand. I realized she'd been looking at my photos. Derek must have forwarded them. 2 inches, she said. "About that, Thaddy, the dock has been inspected twice in the last 3 years. Fractures develop," I said. Thermal cycling, load stress, steel fatigue. Sections catch what's visible at the time. This one wasn't visible 3 years ago. It is now. She studied me for a moment. I couldn't tell if she was deciding whether I was right or deciding how to get rid of me. "I have a shipment coming through this terminal on Friday," she said. "Consolidated freight. It's been rescheduled twice already. If that dock is out of service. If someone gets hurt on that dock," I said, "Friday's shipment will be the least of your problems." The room got quiet. Derek made a sound like he was about to say something. He didn't. Renata Hargrove looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "I want an independent structural assessment by end of day tomorrow." She looked at Derek. "Get one." Then she looked back at me. "Don't go anywhere." I didn't know what that meant. I found out about an hour later when she came and found me in the maintenance bay where I was documenting the conveyor work. "You've been doing industrial maintenance for how long?" she asked. 19 years, I said. "And you've seen load-bearing failures before." "Once. Dock collapse in Youngstown, 2009. I was doing a scheduled inspection on a different structure. I heard it go." I paused. 2 men were on the platform. She was quiet for a moment. "Were they okay?" "No," I said. "Not really. Not after." She nodded slowly. She was looking at the column photos on her own phone now, zoomed in. I watched her actually look at them, not the way Derek had, not looking for a reason to dismiss it, but actually trying to understand what she was seeing. "Walk me through it," she said. "The mechanics." So I did. I explained the weld joint, the load distribution, the way a lateral fracture in that location would behave under dynamic stress. Not just static weight, but the movement and vibration of a truck backing up, the deck shuddering, the load shifting. I told her what I thought the failure mode would look like and what the timing might be under normal operating conditions. She listened. She asked one question: "What's the threshold before it becomes unpredictable?" And when I gave her the answer, she typed something on her phone. "You know your work," she said. "It's not complicated," I said. "It's just paying attention." She looked at me in a way I couldn't quite categorize. "In my experience," she said, "paying attention is exactly the complicated part." The structural engineer arrived the next morning at 7:30. His name was Vincent, and he was thorough. He spent 2 hours on the column. At 9:45 he confirmed what I had found, and added that the fracture extended further into the weld joint than was visible from the surface. His exact words were, This dock should have been pulled from service yesterday. He handed his preliminary report to Renata Hargrove directly. She had shown up at 7. She'd been there the whole time. She read it standing in the maintenance bay doorway, her coffee going cold in her hand. Then she turned to Derek and said, very quietly, "Shut it down." Derek shut it down. The Friday shipment got rescheduled. Again. I expected that to be the end of my involvement. Write up my documentation, close my work order, move on to the next job. That's how it normally goes. Renata Hargrove had a different idea. She called me that afternoon, not through Derek, not through the company dispatch system, but on my cell phone, which I later realized she had gotten from my contractor intake form. "I'd like to buy you dinner," she said. I was in my truck outside a hardware store on Route 18. I looked at my phone for a second like it had said something unexpected, which it had. "I'm sorry?" "Dinner," she said. "Tonight. If you're free. There's a place in Medina I like. I have some things I want to discuss with you. About the dock. Among other things." I thought about what was in my refrigerator. The rest of the chili. 2 eggs. I thought about Bree, who had robotics club until 8 and wouldn't be home until 8:30. "Okay," I said. The restaurant in Medina was the kind of place where the menu doesn't have prices on it if you're a woman. I know that because when the server handed mine to me, it had prices, and when he handed Renata's to her, it didn't. I'd only been to a place like that once before, at a retirement dinner for a foreman I'd worked under for 6 years. I ordered the salmon because it seemed like a thing you ordered at a place like that. Renata ordered something in what I think was French, and the server nodded like that was completely normal. "Tell me about your background," she said. I told her. Community college, the 2-year program, 19 years in the field. Bree. The part about Bree's mother I left brief, not because it was painful anymore, just because it was old and it wasn't the relevant part. Renata listened. She asked about the Youngstown collapse. She asked about the certification process for structural assessments. Not whether I was certified, but what the certification actually covered, what the coursework was, what the practical requirements were. She was testing something, but not in an aggressive way. More like she was trying to understand the shape of what I knew. "You sent the deficiency report in writing before I arrived on site," she said. "Yes, Derek hadn't told me about that. He mentioned the photos." "I have a copy," I said. "I know," she said. "I read it. My compliance officer forwarded it to me this morning." She paused. "The language is very precise. I've written a few of those," I said. "You've written them because things didn't get fixed when you reported them verbally." It wasn't a question. I looked at her. "Yes." She nodded like she had expected that answer and it had confirmed something she was thinking. "Grant," she said. "I have 4 terminals. I have a rail stake that's been underperforming because the infrastructure is aging, and I keep getting told everything is within acceptable parameters. 2 years ago, I paid for a full audit, and the auditors told me the same thing. 3 months after the audit, I had a conveyor failure at the Mansfield terminal that put one of my workers on disability leave for 8 months. She picked up her water glass, set it down without drinking. "I think my people tell me what they think I want to hear," she said. "I think the auditors did the same. And I think if you had been the kind of man who tells people what they want to hear, that dock would have been loaded Friday, and we would have found out the hard way what the failure mode looks like." I didn't say anything for a moment. Outside the restaurant window, the streetlights had come on. It was the kind of quiet street where you could see individual leaves on the sidewalk. "What are you asking me?" I said. "I'm asking if you'd be willing to do a systematic inspection of all 4 terminals," she said. "Not an audit, not paperwork. An actual inspection, the kind you do when you're lying on your back with a flashlight and you're not trying to find anything but you're not going to miss it if it's there." She named a figure. I kept my face neutral. I'd gotten good at that over the years, keeping my face neutral when a number was bigger than I expected. But I was doing math again, fast. 4 terminals. Ohio State application fees, and then tuition, and then 4 years of tuition, and the gap between Bree's scholarship expectations and reality, and the roof on my house that had needed work since 2021. "That's a significant number," I said. "It's a significant job," she said. "I'd need to bring in a structural engineer for the column assessments. I can do the mechanical and load-bearing evaluations but weld integrity on the primary support structures." "Bring whoever you need," she said. I'm not hiring you to cut corners. I looked at her. She looked back. There was something very steady about her. Not hard, exactly. More like she had been through enough things that she didn't waste energy on pretense. Can I ask you something? I said. Yes. Why me? You have a compliance department. You have auditors you've worked with. She was quiet for a moment. I watched you explain a fracture mechanics problem to a facilities manager with 11 years of experience, she said. He didn't understand. You knew he didn't understand. You kept explaining anyway, not because you needed him to agree with you, but because you needed him to be able to explain it to someone else if he had to. She paused. That's a specific kind of integrity. It's rarer than people think. I thought about Al Krebs. If it's not on paper, it didn't happen. I'd want a contract, I said. In writing. Scope of work, timeline, liability terms, of course. And I want it clear that if I find something, the recommendation stands regardless of scheduling or operational impact. She didn't hesitate. That's the only way it's useful to me. I got home at 9:15. Bree was at the kitchen table, laptop open, same pencil behind her ear. How was the meeting? She asked. It wasn't really a meeting, I said. I sat down across from her. You know what a structural inspection contract is? She looked up. Like checking buildings for problems? 4 terminals. Industrial loading infrastructure. I put my hands flat on the table. It would cover Ohio State. She stared at me. All 4 years, I said. If you get in, Dad. She closed the laptop. When you say cover, I mean cover, I said. Room, board, tuition, the gap. All of it. The kitchen was quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car went by slow on our street with its headlights on, and the light swept across the ceiling for a second before it was gone. Because you found a crack, she said. Because I found a crack, I said, and I reported it. She looked at me for a long moment, in the way she sometimes looked at me that reminded me she was 17 and not 7, and that somewhere in the last 10 years, while I was checking weld seams and replacing couplings and writing deficiency reports, she had grown into someone who understood things. You would have reported it either way, she said. Yeah, I said. I would have. She picked up her pencil, opened the laptop. Okay, she said. Then it's good it worked out. The 4-terminal inspection took 11 weeks. I found 3 additional structural deficiencies, none as acute as the dock column, but all of them real, all of them documented, all of them repaired. At the Mansfield terminal, I found the root cause of the conveyor failure that had put Renata's worker on disability, a stress fracture in the secondary drive mount that had been there long enough to accumulate corrosion. It had been missed in the post-incident review. It had been missed in the audit. I documented it. I put it in writing. Renata read every report. She asked questions, good ones. The Mansfield worker, his name was Bernard Tooley, and he'd been back at modified duty for about 6 months by the time I got to that terminal. Came by the bay while I was doing the conveyor assessment. He didn't know who I was or why I was there. He just watched me work for a few minutes and then said, "You finding anything?" "A few things," I said. He nodded slowly. "I used to say that mount didn't feel right," he said. "The vibration pattern. Something was off." He looked at the floor. Nobody wanted to hear it. I looked at him. "I know," I said. "I'm writing it down." Renata called me when the final report was delivered. Not to discuss the findings. We'd talked through those already, terminal by terminal. She called because she'd been in a board meeting and she wanted to tell me something. "My compliance director is pushing back on the Mansfield finding," she said. "He's saying the root cause assessment is outside the scope of what you were contracted to evaluate." "Is he right?" I said. "Technically?" "Technically," she said. "There's an argument. What are you going to do?" "I'm going to tell him that the scope of what I need assessed is everything that can hurt someone in my facilities," she said, "and that the root cause assessment stays in the report." I was in my truck again. Different hardware store, different county road. Same gray Ohio sky. "For what it's worth," I said. "Bernard Tooley knew, before the failure. He tried to report it." "I know," she said. "I talked to him last week." There was a pause, not an uncomfortable one. "Is there anything else you want to tell me?" she said. "While you have the floor." I thought about it for a second. "Your maintenance staff at the Columbus terminal is understaffed by about 30% for the volume they're running," I said. "That's not a structural finding. But the deferred maintenance I saw there is the kind that accumulates when people don't have time to do things right." She was quiet for a moment. I'll look at the staffing model. That's all I've got, I said. That's plenty, she said. Bree got into Ohio State in December. Environmental Science, College of Food, Agricultural, and Environmental Sciences. Her personal statement led with the Creek survey paragraph. She called me from school when she found out. I was under a loading dock in Canton, different terminal, different company, doing what I do. My phone buzzed in my chest pocket. I slid out from under the frame, sat up on the cold concrete, and answered it. She was crying. The good kind. I got in, she said. I know, I said. I didn't know, but it felt like I should have. Dad. Her voice was breaking in the best possible way. Dad, I got in. I sat on the floor of a loading dock in Canton, Ohio, with grease on my jacket and concrete dust in my hair, and I told my daughter I was proud of her. I told her she had earned it. I told her the Creek survey paragraph was the right call. Then I went back under the dock. There was still work to do. There always is. But that afternoon, for the first time in a long time, the math added up. Not just the money. Though the money helped more than I'll ever say out loud, but the other kind of math. The kind where you look at a hairline fracture on a Tuesday morning and you make the call you're supposed to make, and somewhere down the line, in a way you couldn't have planned, it turns into your daughter crying happy tears in a school hallway in December. I'd done the loads analysis on that doc column myself. I knew what I found was real. I knew what reporting it would cost me if Renata Hargrove had been a different kind of person. She wasn't. But here's the thing I keep coming back to. The part I told Bree later, when she asked me if I'd been scared to push back. I didn't report that fracture because I thought it would work out. I reported it because 2 men in Youngstown couldn't walk right anymore, and I was the only person in that terminal who knew what a hairline fracture in a load-bearing weld joint actually meant. That's it. That's the whole reason. Have you ever been the person in the room who said the hard thing? Not because you knew it would turn out fine, but because you were the one who saw it and you couldn't unsee it? I'd love to know. Tell me in the comments. Because I don't think I'm unusual. I think there are a lot of people like Bernard Tooley out there, who knew, who tried to say something, and who got told it wasn't their call. It's always your call. Write it down.